listen, I got to tell you, I've been in search for progress for years, and I got to tell you, one of my videos with Chris, you hear me cursing because I was so excited that things were changing for me. He had to edit me every other word. I was just couldn't believe that in 3 days that I was having. And listen, I don't know how I'm going to play, but I was not hitting the ball like that before I got there, and I've been trying to get better and reach out for help for years, and I just finally felt some relief, like I'm in the right hands. I'm with somebody that he cared about. He spent a lot of time with me, and he generally cares about me getting better. And I felt that when I met with him online prior. I felt like that when I met him in person, and I feel really good about his process. So
today, we start a brand new adventure together. That's right, and I'm very excited about this series, and hopefully you are as well. And I want to welcome you to video number 1, where we're going to answer that really annoying and pressing question in the golf instruction world that's probably never going to have a real answer to it. And that is, why has the average handicap not dropped in 40 plus years? Well, I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you that it's because, yes, we have more golfers playing the game of golf, but it's because our resources that we have available to us don't lead us down the pathway to success, because we get lost in the marketing and the big machine, the big money-making machine that golf has really become. I was just recently at the PGA show, and I can tell you right now, there's a whole lot of stuff coming your way that you're going to feel like you have to go buy because it's promising you the world. But what it comes down to is this, is that you have to learn how to learn. If you learn how to learn, you can start to change who you are. You can start to change the golfer that you are, and you can become a better version of you. And that's exactly what I'm going to be doing today with one of our students, Brian. Brian is a student that just started working with me at the end of November. He hasn't been working with me long at all. And Brian's got a kind of a unique story, but also a story that a lot of you can relate to at home, because I know a lot of you have been through the gamut of golf instruction, and a lot of you have been sort of the frustrated golfer that he is. And Brian is by no means out of the woods. This is not some sort of sexy marketing campaign where I'm going to show you amazing results. But what it is a learning experience, because what we did in the time that we spent together was we started to teach him the most valuable lesson that he has not learned yet. And that was how to practice properly. Practice is incredibly important to this process. And how you practice is always going to be very different than the next person. It's based on your lifestyle. It's based off of your setup. It's based off of all of the little components that make up you and your DNA. And we have to be able to dial that in perfectly. And that's one of the things that I really work hard on, is making sure that we take our swing changes and start to put them to work for us. Because I know that you're going to quantify your success in the game of golf and golf instruction with how you're hitting the golf ball in that moment, and are your scores coming down. I know that for a fact. And if you're working hard on something that's incredibly challenging and incredibly uncomfortable and not showing you the fruits of your labor, then who in their right mind is going to want to stick to that? Now, I know better than that. What you have to have is you have to have a plan that's going to work perfectly for you, and you have to enjoy the process. This is very much a community, and I feel like we can learn from one another, and I feel like showing you how I work through swing change with players is a good idea. I'm going to show you the videos that we use. I'm going to show you the drills that we do. I'm going to show you different ways that you can get your practice sessions working for you. And I'm going to show you how to implement some of this stuff for your own good. Because I know at the end of the day, you want success and you're going to get it. So I want to welcome you to video number 1. Let's tune in and let's see what Brian had to say. First off, I want to welcome Brian. Brian, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me, Chris. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I want to start off by just having you give us a little snapshot of your golfing history. You can give us the Cliff Notes version, and if there's any golf instructors' names, we don't need to necessarily mention their names, but give us a little history of yourself, a little bit about your handicap, the current state of your game, and talk to us a little bit about the reasons why you joined My Golf DNA in the first place.
Sure. So I started golfing probably back in about 2015, 16. Didn't really take on to the game where I wasn't a great scorer. I probably, when I first started, shot in the 120s, maybe 130s when I first started. Was able to get my handicap down just from playing, probably down to like a 25 or a 26 handicap. So my average round is probably in the low to mid hundreds at times. So I started seeking out some golf instruction, and I started with the driving range pros for relatively $50 an hour, and we'll buy a package of 10. I did that, went through my series, didn't really get much better, learned a couple things about my swing, and then I continually sought out different instructors in my attempt to try to get better. I found the process very frustrating. I never really felt like I clicked with anything in a lesson that made any significant difference. I found probably more help in some of the YouTube videos I did and some of the books that I read, to be honest with you, about putting and short game and different things like that, but not a whole lot on a lesson. Then I finally said, well, I want to invest, and I hired a pretty popular person in my area. It was very expensive, probably over $300 an hour. Saw him for a year and said, I'm going to commit and really commit to this. And I did all the practices and saw him probably at least twice a month for a year. And I started as a 25 handicap and I ended as a 25 handicap. And that was about a 4-hour time block out of my day and $6,000 later. So at that point, I was really frustrated and decided, I kept looking because I do like to play and I do get sucked in when I hit a good shot and know that, at times I do hit good shots and have good holes and can par a hole or birdie a hole on occasion. I just can't do it with any consistency. So my goal has been to break 90, which I haven't been able to do. I've gotten pretty close, but I haven't been able to do that just yet. So I went online. I said, well, I'm going to go fly and see somebody. I found a couple people that I like their stuff online. And after that, I spoke to Chris and we emailed back and forth and I sent him my swings. And he said he'd be willing to see me in Florida. And I booked the trip and made the investment. And I've been working with Chris, I guess, since November. I think somewhere around November.
Yeah.
Started doing the online trainings, and then I went down for 3 days a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, so Brian was very adamant about coming to do things in person. And in-person instruction is, obviously, there's no lag time in the online world with it, right? So it can be very pointed, and we can make sure that you get information that's going to be pertinent to you and your DNA at that very moment. And generally speaking, when somebody's coming in, I don't want to do anything more than 2 days of 2 hours apiece, but Brian showed up with a notebook, and you can tell that he's a true student of the game, and you can tell that he's got a lot of information in his brain, and he's still got a lot of questions in his brain. And I think one of the things that we started out doing on day one was really identifying the goals. What are the goals? And we had a score goal in mind, but we also had a very important goal when it came down to what was going to make the practice sessions enjoyable, what was going to make the game enjoyable for you. Talk to us a little bit about what those goals were and what the information that you gave me on day one.
I believe the goals were one of I've been trying to chase ball, then divot, then ground contact for 10 years or 8 years since I've been golfing. Actually, one thing I left out, the last 6 instructors I went to, I started off by saying, all I want to do is be able to hit the ball and then hit the ground, take a divot after the ball. Like I've been chasing that on rehearsal swings and everything and have not been able to get into that position. That was a big goal. I believe I wanted to start shooting in the low 80s to mid 80s by the end of next season. I'd like to break 90 by sometime in the spring summer this year, and see that handicap go down. And I'd like to see me progressing, going into a positive direction, because for me it's not really fun not to score well, and it's definitely not fun for me to put 3 digits on a scorecard. It makes me feel like I want to quit. I just can't handle that rejection of myself or inability to perform. I struggle with that. So if I can't get better, it's tough for me to hang in there. But I've hung in there, as you can see, for a long time. So
yeah,
my big goals were divot after the ball, be in the mid to low 80s by the end of next season, and be progressing in a positive direction.
Yeah, so Brian put me in kind of an uncomfortable situation as a golf instructor, because when somebody's been through the gamut of golf instruction and they've got a lot of information in their brain, it's very difficult as a golf instructor to be able to kind of walk them off the ledge as to what information is good and what information is bad. And golf instructors, we don't really want to bash, I hope we don't really want to bash one another. What we really are here for is to try to figure out how to be a problem solver for that student. And so when I started to dive into Brian's golf swing before he came down here to Florida, his golf swing is actually much better than the skill set of a 25 handicap. So I wanted to really kind of dive in and understand why he was losing so many shots to par. And I thought to myself, he's either got incredibly bad short game or he's got just a catastrophic miss that shows up on the golf course all the time, and it just continues to put him behind the 8 ball. And when you look at his golf swing, the big thing is that he's got the big components in place. He knows how to generate force. He knows how to move his body like an athlete. But when you look at the bottom of the swing arc, he uses so much right side that forces the club face to have a very unstable sort of movement through the hitting area, which it's ultimately affecting the path. It's affecting the rate of closure. It's affecting the angle of attack. It's affecting the dynamic loft in the club. All of the big components that go into ball flight. And so, looking at those things, I felt like the best strategy for us before he came down to Florida was to start on this sort of reverse engineering pathway, where we started to train him what he should do with his lead arm and his lead wrist and get him to feel what it's like to move properly through there. And I got a lot of pushback. I got a lot of, I wouldn't say it was pushback, but it was a lot of trying to figure out if this is actually right or wrong. And I like those sorts of questions. And I like that sort of scenario because it allows me to dive into not only the sciences behind it, but it gives you facts-based information that can help you kind of understand more in your brain about where you're trying to head. And so when we fast forward from the time that we started working on the reverse engineered pathway when we get to Orlando, the first thing that Brian set out and set as a goal for me, or from me in that process, was he needed to be able to feel a compressed golf shot, to be able to take and hit the ball first, get that ground contact, and be able to take that little divot. And I tried to convince him that you don't need to take a divot in order to compress the golf ball, but he was like, I still want to see that divot. So when we look at the big picture of his swing shape, there's some things that I need to do earlier on in the swing shape that are going to allow him to be ultimately better with the sequence and to be able to take some of the emphasis off the smaller muscles that are causing the issues in the first place. But if I started with that stuff on day one, then what we would have found is that it's not going to lead to glamorous results. Working on loading your right leg and getting your hips to stabilize, to keep the spine from going into over rotation or having the arms get long on us, is not going to have a positive outcome for a lot of players. And so what we did is we basically worked on getting him in these smaller golf swings to start getting good solid contact, and then we found the threshold where he was able to maintain the connection to the movements and be able to start hitting some golf shots. And by day one, I feel like we made some significant progress.
I agree. Actually, Chris told me not to practice after he left. And like a great student, I did anyway. And I actually had my 5-iron in my gym locker at my club for the past year because I haven't been able to hit it. I actually brought that to Florida with me, pulled it out, and I was hitting it on a rope. I was hitting it into the wind, so I was only getting about 140 carry, but I probably would have had about 170 to 190 carry if I wasn't hitting directly into the wind. And I couldn't believe that I was hitting the club. I literally gave up on that club. I actually bought a 5 hybrid because I got tired of not being able to hit it.
Yeah.
So it was nice to see that after day one.
That's right. Well, I have spies, so we spent 3.5 hours on day one, which we had 2 hours booked. We went an hour and a half over just because we were getting some very good progress, and Brian was very connected to what I was giving to him. So, when I see a student staying in that sort of mindset where they're in that learning process, I'm going to stay with them and make sure that they get as much as they can handle. And I encouraged him not to continue to practice for that day, but he stayed out there till about 4:30 in the afternoon, from what I understand. I got messages from the guys in the cart barn and Brian O'Neill, who owns the academy. And so then we fast forward to day two. And day two was, in my eyes, was the make or break day for us because I was going to be starting to ramp it up a little bit and give you something that was more difficult. And there was a lot of times where it was hard to put it all together. But day two was just the lead-in point to what was most important, what we learned on day three. And I want to talk more about what we did on day three because we have some video footage from that part of the session that really started to develop a strategy for you when you get home. And this is the piece of the puzzle that so many people miss when it comes to getting better at the game of golf. You've heard me say it before, is that people don't work on the right things at the right time, whether it's because they're lost in some sort of YouTube abyss, or if they're just trying to do something for more of the aesthetic value, or they see playing professionals doing it, who knows? Or they just don't have an understanding of the correct order in which they should be working on things as part of their DNA. And the other big thing is that people just don't know how to practice. And there's different styles of practice, but what it comes down to is I could preach technical practice versus performance practice all day long. But when we look in and we boil it down even further, we have to understand Brian and his lifestyle. Brian has a full-time job. Brian has family. Brian is not going to be a person that's grinding 6-8 hours a day out there on the range. He wants to be able to make sure that his time is used wisely. So let's talk about what we did on day three that left you with the feeling that you knew what the pathway to progression really was. Let's talk about the entire experience of day three.
Okay. Okay. So I guess day three, what we worked on in day one and day two, day three, we worked on how to practice really and how to take the things we build upon and started with day one and day two. And here's what this looks like when I'm not with you. And here's what I want you to do. So some of the big ahas for me from day three were the difference between playing, what you do when you play, what you do when you're having performance practice, like on the range, and what you're doing with technical practice and how to blend that. So I guess, as a golfer, we always want to hit the ball well, and it's very difficult for me when I receive a drill is just to worry about getting my body or my movements in the proper sequence. I want to hit the ball well. So I guess the big aha for me with technical practice is that when I'm doing technical practice, I have to just learn, get connected. That was really the big thing. You said you have to basically feel connected to the movement. You probably said that. I wish I had a nickel for every time you said that. That was really key. Like I have to feel, like you don't have to feel the connection. I have to feel some type of connection to the movement and what that feels like for me. And I may verbalize that different than you may verbalize it, but I have to connect with it. So really technical practice was really just learning the movement without regard for where the ball goes. And that is really hard for me because I want to see the ball. Oh, I didn't do it right because the ball didn't go right. But, I might have to hit that 1,000 times or a couple hundred times before that movement really starts taking effect and that pattern starts developing. I almost have to do it as much as I've done it incorrectly, for it to really become where I don't have to think about it. And that's the hard thing with golf is learning that. And I probably still haven't learned it. I have to practice it, but that's probably still going to be the discipline and practice. And performance practice is basically like what I do on the range, like taking that technical move and applying it to hitting balls and see how that's going to fly. And then when I play, basically I had a lot of bad habits when I play. Like I take rehearsal swings at the ball when I'm at a dress. I'll take 2 or 3. My friends always make fun of me because I take so long to hit a ball sometimes. And what we talked about was being like about 3 to 4 feet behind the ball, behind the truss line. And that's where I'm going to work on any of my movements, take a rehearsal. But when I walk into the ball, all I'm thinking about is my shape shot and and the target and hitting the ball. And that's the only thing my focus should be on.
Bingo. So that right there is the most valuable lesson that I can teach anybody out there. And it really comes down to understanding that there's nothing that's considered perfect when it comes to golf instruction. And we're certainly playing a game that we're not going to be perfect at when we hit golf shots. We need to be able to understand what it is we're doing. We have to identify in that process. But when you look at it in a practice session, what you're trying to get done is you want connected movement trumps everything. Then connected movement supersedes fluid movement. Fluid movement, then it turns into impact. Impact, then we look at results. We start to quantify our success. But what I did on day 1 and day 2 with Brian is that I armed him with an arsenal of things that he knew would ultimately affect the way the ball flew off the club face. So on one of the very first reps that we did, and we basically came up with a hybrid sort of practice session for him, just like I would do with any students, where we had a blend of technical practice and performance practice going on at the same time. And when Brian would hit a shot, if he was very connected to the movements, then we would assess how the golf ball came off the club face and what we saw for his shot shape. And what I wanted him to be able to do was when he looked at the ball flight, be able to verse back to me and say, openly say what the issue was there so that he could put more emphasis on the technical side of things on the next set. And so if we had a little bit of an overdraw, he knew that there was a little bit of stall out from the left shoulder, left arm through the bottom that his hands got a little bit more active with. And so he knew where to put the emphasis in on the technical practice. Then he moved away from the golf ball into performance practice mode, and then he would hit another shot. And you hit a lot of very high quality shots. But let's talk about not just the high quality shots, because I want to make sure people understand that when you play a game of misses, as a golf instructor, all I'm really trying to do is I'm trying to manage your miss. And we had a couple of miss hits that happened with the 5-iron. I think we had 5-wood too, right?
Oh yeah, that was our last day. That's when I was taking the divot, and I was amazed that I was taking a small divot with my 5-wood because I don't typically do that.
So Brian learned that he can hit down on all of his clubs.
Yes.
But talk to me about...
I was hitting up, what, 3 degrees up when I started on day 1?
3 degrees up.
3 degrees up I was hitting, and by the time I left, I was anywhere from -2 to minus 0.5 or whatever. I was hitting down.
Mm-hmm.
So that was huge for me. Huge.
So, but let's talk about my reaction to when you mishit golf shots in that practice session. What would I not allow you to do?
Not allow me to, if it wasn't perfect, I didn't give myself a great score, even though it was seriously an improved shot. So I was overcritical of ball flight and direction when I hit a ball.
Exactly. We are our own worst enemies in this process. We get down on ourselves way too quickly. And people lose sight of how important it is, especially when you're playing the game of golf and it's not your livelihood, but it's important to you that you enjoy the process. You have to be able to go out there and have fun while you're working on change. You have to know what you're doing. You have to know why you're doing it. And you have to have a good plan in place. And then you have to go out there and give yourself a whole lot of grace in this process. And you probably heard me say that more times than you care to admit. Like, calm down, give yourself grace. Your skill set, you show up here as a 25 handicap. Let's look at the actual shots that you're producing and assess them based off of your skill set. And you hit, when we started going through the rest of the bag, if I were to grade you on your skill set based off of what you were showing me, there's no reason why you should be a low double-digit player. Like a 10, 11 should be kind of where you were at with based off of what you were showing me. But that doesn't mean you're going to go home and start shooting 82, 83, 84. We've got a lot of work to do. But what we did is we designed a program for him that he was able to verse back to me, that he was going to be able to match up with his lifestyle. And then we're going to use the online format to keep an eye on him as he goes forward in the process. And so the most valuable message that I can pass along to all the students out there is that practice properly, have fun in it, understand that you're trying to get connected to the movements first and foremost, and then you're trying to build fluidity around that. And if you want to hit golf balls in the process or you want to play golf, which I'm assuming all of you want to do, is allow yourself some wiggle room and allow yourself the understanding, hey, I'm going to do my very best to stay connected to these movements and I'm going to produce the best shot that I can. And if you go down that pathway and you communicate with me or any other instructor with what you're seeing on the range, what's good and what's bad, sending us videos, let us look at it, we can dial it in even further for you. And it makes the process, yes, it's a long-term process, but it allows the process to be fun and it allows you to see the light at the end of the tunnel. We met Brian's goal on day 1 by getting him to hit down on the golf ball. We enhanced the goal on day 2 by giving him more technical stuff that he's going to take on. And as a golf instructor, it's incredibly irresponsible of me to give him 3 things to go home and work on. And I think there might even be a 4th thing in there. But what he knows is that he knows how to be able to move in and out of those strategies that I gave him the right way to be able to make the adjustments, to make the whole practice protocol way more productive for him. And I'm proud of you, man. You worked really hard. 10 hours with me is a lot in 3 days. Having me.
Well, thank you for putting up with me for that much time too.
So Brian, is there anything that you would pass along now that you've been through this process with me to the students at home that you find was different about your experience with me, or is there something that the students can learn from aside from the stuff that I just said?
I think the big thing is if you don't feel like if you're really putting in the time and you're getting instruction and instead of just trying to watch one YouTube video or read a book and go think you're going to get better, I think that's an unrealistic goal. I think you got to really commit to somebody for like a term, like 6 months or a year, to really follow their system. What attracted me about Chris was that he had a system, and I felt like there might have been a lot of things from backswing to release that were missing in there, and sequencing was obviously off because I couldn't properly, compress the golf ball and hit down on it. So there was obviously some things I was missing that I got to tell you, I've had 12 to 14 instructors in the past 9 years. And some of them are really high regarded around here. And when I ask people who to go to, they give me the same people I've seen. And listen, and maybe it's not all them, and maybe it's the way I learned, but I needed to connect with somebody. So I would say if you're not feeling you're getting the results you would like, keep looking for that right person. But you got to commit. Like I made the investment to go to Florida because I felt like in person would be better for me. Spent a lot of money, so for me, a trip to Florida was a small fraction of the cost of what I spend in golf. So it's that important to me to try to improve. So I would say just keep at it, but it doesn't, like you said, it's a game of misses and missing less. It's not a game of perfection and flushing the ball every time, but you should see yourself progressing. You should see things getting better.
That's right. That's
So
right.
if you're not getting better, move on and find somebody else.
So I've done this for a long time, and I know like any person that comes to the website, they're sitting with me in consult format, they're sitting with me in private instruction format, is that they'll say that I know that I got to go through the process. I'm okay with going down the ladder before I go back up, and I will call BS all day long. Because
Right.
in order to get people to enjoy the process, you've got to get them some wins. And that's exactly why I structured the lesson protocol the way that I did. Is if I could get Brian to filter out some of the information that he had in his brain, get him to start hitting the golf ball at the level that he wanted to, albeit not with all the speed that he was looking for right then and there, and then slowly build the other components back into it, then we had a program that he could stick to. And there was one thing that we ran into on day 2 that really, I think, is also a valuable lesson to a lot of students at home that we'll end with. And that is day 2 was when I told him, because I was finishing up, I think I was filming a video after I was done with you. And
Right.
as I was finishing up, you were still out there grinding away. And you had an extended session the day after the first day. Day 2, you're back out there, you're still grinding away. And you started to notice that there was some deterioration in your reps. And I watched you from afar, like getting a little bit down on yourself. And what that was attributed to was one very big factor. And what was that? Al, you want me to answer it for you?
I think I was exhausted for one.
Bingo. Fatigue.
I was exhausted. Yeah. I mean, I swung, God, I could have had 1,000 swings in 2 days. I swung the club a lot.
Fatigue.
And I was going into like double OT, and I'm 52. And I'm not 20.
Yeah.
I've had 2 rotator cuff surgeries in the past 7 years. So, I got to also take care of my body,
Exactly. So,
yeah.
and people underestimate when you're in a deep learning sort of state, how mentally exhausting it is as well. You'll feel the physical fatigue from it, but I'm putting you into a mindset where you're getting very connected to movements and you're pushing yourself to be accountable for your actions in that process. And it's very taxing. This is a lot of the reason why people don't get success when they start out the process of it, because number one, they don't really see the wins that they're looking for and based off of the time that they're investing to it. But number two, the level of discomfort that comes along with change is extraordinary, right? It's never comfortable. And that's the hard part for us as golf instructors, is that we have to put you into positions and movement that's so foreign to you that you swear up and down there's no way that you're ever going to hit a golf ball like that. But the minute that you do hit a golf ball like that, and what we ran into on day 3, when we have rep after rep after rep, where you're hitting it right out of the middle of the face and you're hitting it little scud missiles down the fairway, and we can look over and we can see on the data exactly what you showed up for, that gives you the light. And now it's all about putting in the work. So I'm going to stop right there because we've got a lot to talk about. But first off, I want to thank Brian for the time that he spent with me, not just here in Orlando, but also the time that he just spent giving us kind of an overview as to what he did while he was here, so that a lot of you at home could start getting the wheels turning about what you should do moving forward when it comes to your practice sessions. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about now for the rest of the video, because I want to help you understand how you can develop your own practice program. And the style of practice program that I designed for him was very much something that a lot of you can utilize. As we start to go forward in this video, I want you to understand that I'm going to kind of geek out a little bit here first before I start to give you the nuts and bolts of what we did with him specifically. And you have to understand that the reason why I give you this information is because the more information that you have in your brain about what it is that you're doing, why you're doing it, and then how you're going to get the job done, the better off you're going to be because you have confidence in the process. So let's talk a little bit about your brain and what your brain is going to do for you in this process. Because the brain, whether you know it or not, I'm fascinated by the brain. I was epileptic when I was a kid, and I just spent so much time in my adult life trying to understand the brain. And one of the things that I really hang my hat on as a golf instructor is understanding neuromuscular reeducation, what it takes to rewire the brain. And believe it or not, every single one of you is capable of being able to build a new movement pattern or restructure a new movement pattern. When you hear me say the word movement pattern, that's what the golf swing is. It's a series of movements from your address position all the way to your finish position. It's a series of movements. It's a pattern. And we can disrupt that pattern if you understand that it comes down to repetitions and time. You need a large quantity of repetitions. 3,000 to 5,000 repetitions is where a movement pattern is a real thing. But you also need to understand that 3,000 to 5,000 repetitions doesn't mean that your old movement pattern is going to die. Old movement patterns, they never die. And as we get older, our brains become a little bit more pesky because those movement patterns are so ingrained that your brain is always going to try to figure out what it's most comfortable with in that sort of fight or flight mode. When you introduce the consequence, like a golf ball or the golf course or the stress, back to the subconscious, it's always going to revert to the one that it's most comfortable with. So in this process, we have to do a better job of being able to push your subconscious to the back burner and be as conscious about your movements as you possibly can. And that starts with your first practice session. But your first practice session needs to be centered around the idea that you're going to go and get really focused movement. You need to get connected to a movement and be very consistent. Somewhere between 100 to 300 repetitions is what you're looking for in that first critical practice session, where you do a slow movement inside of your golf swing where you do it perfectly. Something that's different, something that you know you're really connected to. And then about 2 to 14 days after you have that practice session, these things called oligodendrocytes are going to be deployed. And this is the construction of that new neural pathway. And in that neural pathway, this is where we start to construct this stuff called myelin. Myelin sheath is just this fatty substance that forms itself around the axis of the neuron. And the more repetitions you do, and the more time you give this, and the more nurturing of that pattern that you give it, the more that myelin starts to act as an insulator for the electrical impulse to travel faster and faster and faster. And that's why we can do so many things in our lives at a subconscious level. Now, how do we quantify our success when it comes to the game of golf? Well, the two metrics are how we're hitting the golf ball in that moment and are our scores starting to come down. Now, I quantify your success in this process through how your ability is to be able to maintain your focus on the movement and challenge the subconscious along the way. You have to challenge the subconscious. You can't become complacent and do 3,000 to 5,000 reps of just one particular movement and not have your eyes looking down at the golf ball or not hit golf balls. You need to hit golf balls in this process, but you need to do it where you're not putting the emphasis on what happens. The emphasis needs to be on what it is that you're doing with your body. Technical practice is where you put all of the thoughts away and you get really connected to a very focused body movement and making sure that you can do that in a very slow and methodical way and have a gradual speed build to that process as you start to complete your reps. And generally speaking, just like I said in the opener, is that you're going to want to try to get those practice sessions centered around 100 to 300 of the most perfect reps that you can bring to the table. Now, performance practice is where we start putting a lot of the technical thinking away. We start putting it to the test. We start putting it out on the range or putting it on the golf course or putting it in our simulators and seeing what our swing is now capable of being able to produce. But a lot of times people start putting the foot on the accelerator too quickly and they start getting their expectations out of line. You can also find a good blend of performance practice and technical practice, which is exactly what we did with Brian. Now let me talk a little bit about Brian's scenario. So Brian, when he came into town, we wanted to work on day one by getting him to hit golf balls, but work on a very technical movement that he needed to feel perfectly down in front of his body. We worked on a little hand and arm path correction down in front of him, and we certainly worked on some good release drills that were really tied back into the stuff that we were working on online. And then on day two, we had more technically minded thinking. We were working on loading into the right leg, stabilizing the pelvis, and we were really working on trying our best to be able to blend those two things together. But we kept them very separate at the same time because we wanted to make sure that we were getting a large number of reps done so that he would go home and be able to retain that information. But on day three, this is where we started to make the practice plan come to light. And this is something that I would suggest to you that you guys all try to follow along with. And the first step of designing your own practice program is to really state your intentions for that practice session. What am I trying to get done? Well, I'm going to take my time and I'm going to try to get the best repetitions that I can. Let's just say it's a right wrist function. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to stay super focused on that. But I also want to be able to hit golf balls. Hitting golf balls is the fun part of the process. And so many of you lose sight of how important it is to have fun when you're working on your golf game. When we designed this program, I had Brian doing a couple of really buttoned up, slow movements working down in front of his body. These were very technically minded movements. And what he did is he did those reps at the golf ball with his eyes focused down on the golf ball. And once he got some good connection to those movements and we use this accountability scale, we call it the 1 to 3 rating system. What we did is we now switched our brain into performance practice mode. And performance practice starts from back and behind the golf ball. It starts with our pre-shot routine. Brian had a pre-shot routine, and I never really want to interrupt or change people's pre-shot routine unless it's obtrusive to the process. And I had to make a pretty good size shift to his pre-shot routine where I got him away from the golf ball, I got him back, starting to look at his target, and then rehearsing some of the movements in his brain that he just did, and starting to create some feels around those movements and start to make those movements more fluid. He would do 1 or 2 practice swings in behind the golf ball, he would clear out his brain, and then he would walk into the ball and he would hit his shot. Now what we would do at that point is if we were connected to the movements and we felt like we did our best job of making the best swing that we could, trying to get those movements in place at a speed that we knew that we were capable of being able to do so, then we would shift our eyes to the strike and to the ball flight. So many of you are always going to look at the strike and the ball flight first. We don't care about that. You care about getting your movement to look as close to your practice reps as you possibly can. Look at it on camera. The first time that you take commitment to it and not worry about the failure that comes along with golf, then the first time you're going to start to see the light. You're going to say, I can actually see my club on plane, or I can see more lag, or I can see a better impact position. Yes, I didn't hit the golf ball incredibly well, but I know that I can see it now in place. And as you start to get better with that sort of mantra, that mentality, what's going to happen is now you can start to shake out some of the tension in the movements, and you're going to start being able to quantify your success, not just on the movement, but how you're hitting the ball. And what I do as a golf instructor is I generally want to arm you with an arsenal, a toolbox, if you will, something that you can take out to the range so that you can make the adjustment based off of what you see in the ball flight if you know that you were connected to the movements. And that's exactly when we started to turn the corner with Brian. Brian knew that with the information that I gave him on day 2, if he saw a ball that was going to go into a little bit of an overdraw scenario, is that he knew that he had a little bit of stall out from his left arm and a little bit of tension in his left shoulder, and he started to flip his hands over. And so what you have to do when you see a bad shot come out with movement that you were connected to is now in that technically minded practice, before you start going back into performance practice mode, is put more emphasis on that movement that you're trying to change. So Brian would go ahead into his technical practice, he would drill a couple of reps, make sure that they were of the highest quality, put more emphasis on one area of the body that he's going to try to see in his brain, and then he would go back into performance practice mode and go back through that same process. And on the very next golf ball that he hit, when he went back into performance practice mode, he was super connected to the movements and we got to see the golf ball flying much better. That's something that we can all do with you, but you have to give us that opportunity, and the way that you're going to give us that opportunity is by one very important factor, and that's communication. You have to be able to communicate back with me. You have to show me the videos. I was doing technical practice, I was doing performance practice. This is what I was yielding. I was really connected to the movements, but this is what I was hitting for shots. Because at the end of the day, I don't want you to go out there and spend your time struggling on the range. I don't want you going out there and hitting the ball all over the place. I want you to hit the golf ball really well, but I want your practice sessions to be productive. I want you to start seeing the new movement start to come to light. And what this blend of technical and performance practice does is it helps the process be fun. I don't want you sitting on the sidelines doing 3,000 to 5,000 reps without introducing the levels of consequence of the golf ball. I want you doing reps with the golf ball being present. I want you to challenge the subconscious so you can show it that this is the pattern that's going to be there. So let me recap. The key is to understand that you're all capable of learning. The key is to understand that you can build a practice session that's perfect for you. Identify what you're doing, how much time you have. Go out there and say, I know how to do this movement perfectly. I'm going to get connected to that movement. Make sure that you build fluidity into that movement and challenge yourself to work at a speed, as uncomfortable as it might be, to work at 50% speed or 60% speed, and get a golf ball in front of it, a foam ball, a regular ball, and prove to yourself that you can make a golf swing that looks like the new movement that you've been trying to work on. And as you start to get better at that movement, you're going to start to see that the ball starts to come off the face a lot better. And if it's not, then communicate with your instructor. Always remember this. Keep the distractions down. Have fun in the process, take breaks, and know when to quit in a session. Do not go in there and try to get it all done in one day. You have to follow the mantra. Connected practice or methodical movement trumps fluid movement at first. And that trumps the ball strike and the direction of the golf ball. You have to stay in that mindset if you want real results. And that's exactly the mindset that we burned into Brian. So in next week's video, or the next video I should say, that's coming out in this series, we're going to be talking about the importance of setup. Because we had a student that is a very good player that neglected one piece of his setup that not allowed him to move dynamically and aggressively, but also plagued his impact position for many years. And making one little setup adjustment allowed the body to start moving with more freedom. So many of you at home lose sight of how important it is to get yourself set up. So I want to use that as a big time case study for us in our next video. So hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did like today's video, let us know in the comments below. If you have any questions, then please feel free to post that up. Also, show Brian some love in the comments below, and we will see you guys in the next video.